charging you with their rage or even their demand, the most loving thing to go to and say, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to respond to your demand. Right?
You might be going, I'm sorry.
And then they can say, oh, I didn't have a demand. I'm sorry, but you did, and you just need to go away now. If it was my house, I would feel completely in my right to do that. If it was their house, I wouldn't do that. I'd say, I'm sorry, but I need to go away now. And I'd be out the door, right? Just recently up at, you know how we've got all this God's Way of Love starting up, and it's quite interesting at times. Anyway, we had a group of people over for, they were helping us, we're turning our house into an office. And there were a heap of people helping us pack up all of our, well, I'd call it rubbish probably, and putting it into a shipping container. And one lady came up to me with this bag of seeds, and she says to me, she hands them to me and says, I've got all these seeds that are really wonderful, and she starts explaining the seeds to me and what the wonderful things about the seeds are. And I'm going, no worries. And she's going, yeah, and it's really wonderful. What can I do with them? And the man next to me had actually already talked to her. He was the leader of the environment team standing next to me, and he'd said, actually, didn't we talk about this last week? She said, yes. And I said, well, why do you now want to have the bag of seeds presented to me when you could have just gone up to the leader of the environment team, his name's Dennis, you could have just gone up to Dennis and given him the seeds, which you know he wants. Why did you have to make such a song and dance about it? Right? And then she started going, oh, well, it's because, and she started feeling, and she goes, oh, I can feel I just want your approval and everything. I said, yes, that's exactly right. And she left straight away, crying, but she felt very rejected. Now, was I rejecting her? No, I was actually denying her the addiction of getting my approval. That's what I was doing. That's not a rejection.
In fact, remember we said when you're at one with God, that's what you do 100% of the time. So, yeah.
So I wasn't rejecting her. I was just in that place denying her addiction. She went away feeling rejected. So is that the right feeling for her to feel if she wants to get closer to God?
Well, was it the truth of what was happening?
It's not the truth of what was happening. I was not rejecting her. What is the truth? She doesn't want to feel the demand for the addiction being met. But instead of feeling that, she goes away feeling rejected. Interesting. Can you ever become at one with God by feeling an emotion that's not really there? I don't think so. Where's the rubber? I just would like to raise something about this with each of you. This is a basic thing about emotions that we need to probably understand. You didn't get that at all? No. We need to use the mic, Deidre. Yes, you do need to use the mic.
Oh, I just hate the sound of my own voice.
We don't. We love the sound of your voice.
But because that's happened to me, but I feel rejected by men anyway. So it might not be the emotion at the time, but it's still an emotion within me. Let me explain.
Okay. It's always good having an explanation, isn't it? Here's the self that God sees. You can draw it as a circle if you want, but I'm going to draw it as a square because I'm going to write in. We'll call it the real self. That's the self, that's the self that God created. Right? The pristine, clean self. The true personality that you are. Yeah? Which is nothing like you currently are, by the way. Right? Thank God for that, she says. Right. This is the real self. It's the pristine self God created. No injuries. This one is the injured self. This is the self that your parents created. Do you understand? Through all of and your environment, basically, but your parents are the primary creators of this environment. So this is God's creation. This is your parents' creation. Do you understand so far? Okay. This creation is the one most of you are having trouble with. It's the facade self.
Who created that?
Which you created. Now, the key here is to get the significance of the relationship between these three parts of yourself. This self you created so that you could avoid this self. And this self, your parents and your environment created so they could avoid this self. You get it? Now, if you look at this, you will see, actually, it's very interesting because the only part that I need to actually clear away that are causal emotions are related to this self, aren't they? They're not actually this self. There won't be many causal emotions related to this self because this is the self I created for myself. So in other words, I prefer to be here than I do to be here. I prefer to see the facade self. Now, what do I prefer to see from the facade self?
Is that where you said that I use fear as an excuse?
Ah, yes.
Something?
I'm too afraid. I can't do it. I'm too afraid.
Fear excuses.
So that's different from going, I'm really afraid and... Yeah.
That's the facade self, yep. What else?
Nobody loves me. I'm just so rejected.
Nobody loves me. Everybody hates me. I think I'll just go and... No Bobby loves me. That's probably true too. Nobody. They all reject me. There's a heap of stories. Now, these stories are not consistent for each person. They're very, very different for each person. So don't say just because
this emotion is here doesn't mean it exists.
Yeah, that's what I was
or doesn't
getting
exist
confused,
there,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But we use these emotions here, and there's a long list of them that we could make. We use these emotions here in order to avoid the other emotions. Now, one emotion that is used a lot is, I feel rejected, right? Now, the truth is, with my interaction with that lady,
So let's see what the facade... Sorry, I'm the lady.
So Mary's the lady.
Sorry.
Let's call her Jane, right? Is that all right, Jane, if we call her Jane? It wasn't Jane, by the way, so it's just to make that clear.
So here's the seeds.
Here's the seeds, and I'm asking, what's going on with you? Like, why do you have to offer me the seeds?
And I go, I really wanted to share this gift with you, you know.
And I'm going,
It's
no,
my facade
it's not that.
And then what do you tell me?
No. I asked her, what is it really? And then she started saying, it's because I want your approval. Bingo, she is right at that particular moment. She does want my approval. Is that not a demand? Can you see that is a demand? She is demanding my approval, and the way she's going to try to earn it is by giving me something that she feels will earn it in that moment. You get me? Is that not a demand? Of course it is. Is that love? No, it's not. It's a bartering system for my approval. That's all it is. Right? So she's handing it to me, right? And I'm not taking it from her. I'm going, okay, what is going on? She says, I'm seeking your approval. Spot on. Right at that moment, spot on. She was in the right emotion. She was seeking my approval.
She started out facade self. I just want to share this beautiful gift with you. AJ says, no,
I'm sorry, that's not true.
So, okay, I want your approval.
I want your approval.
Yes.
Yes, spot on. Spot on. Causal emotion in that somewhere. And then I say, well, now go away and feel that.
Go, okay.
And what does she go away feeling?
Rejected.
Rejected. She went away feeling rejected. Can you see? She's now not feeling the causal emotion, which was she wanted my approval, which was a demand. She was demanding on me something that was highly unloving, something that I didn't have to give, and neither should, if I loved her, give her, because she was demanding it. And in that moment, she now went away in a completely facade emotion,
So,
feeling rejected.
some people cry for 3 hours. I was rejected. It felt really bad.
AJ rejected me again. No, I did not reject you. I prevented you from having your addiction met. That's not a rejection. That is actually an action of love to prevent someone from having their addiction met.
So what would be the way I would deal with it causally?
So if she had just followed my advice when I turned her around and said, go away and feel that emotion, the emotion I was referring to was the emotion of, I want AJ's approval and I'm not getting it. Do you follow me? That's the emotion she needed to feel.
That's where I feel like everyone needs to start with addiction. A lot of people go, oh, I've got an addiction to man's approval. It's got to be dad stuff, should be grief. Okay, go and cry about feeling rejected by dad. And the truth is they're doing an intellectual skip to the emotion that they think they should be having and go, I'm crying about this. The truth is they're not. They're crying, I want my addiction met and I'm not getting it met. And it's really a surface layer emotion.
And it's also a demand. It's also very unloving. In that moment, by crying and saying, I'm not getting my addiction met, you're actually being even more unloving than you were prior.
And it's even worse if I'm crying about not getting my addiction met and saying, now I'm crying about dad rejecting me.
And you can cry like that for 10 years and you're never going to get rid of the causal emotion that created it.
You're still going to come with a bunch of seeds.
Yeah. The next time you get the opportunity. Yeah.
To deal with it authentically, I would go away and go, oh no, I really want that man's... I
wanted that approval.
I want that emotion from him. Like, I really feel like I need it. I really want it. And it's hurting that I'm not getting it.
And I feel angry that I haven't got it. And I feel frustrated with him. Why couldn't he just give it to me? He could have given it to me, you know. It's just a little bit of effort. He could have just said, thank you very much. You're a wonderful woman. And just one line like that and I would have got my addiction met.
And then I go, whoa, hey, I've got a lot of demand here. Like, when I really go into that emotion, I can go, yeah, I'm really wanting a lot from this man. Wow. And if I'm sincere, I'll go, that's a big demand I've got going on. Wow, that must be covering a lot of pain in me. And I must be pretty afraid to feel that pain because otherwise I wouldn't be demanding it from every man. And so immediately my process becomes more causal.
Yeah.
If I want to tell myself a pretty story, I go up, I feel rejected, I go, well, that's because I wanted his approval, I don't have dad's right, cry, cry, cry. It's all about dad's rejection, but the truth is I'm not really feeling it. And if you're honest with yourself, what you're feeling is, I want him to give me what I want, which is very different from crying, I feel like I'm nothing to dad. It's a very different place. One's way up here and one's way down here in terms of your heart.
Let me give you another example. On the same day this happened, we had about 40 people there, so during the day, you know, of course, there's a lot of addictive things happening, but and I could list 25 of them probably off the top of my head that I remember, but there's this other one that happened which was quite interesting too, similar kind of event. This lady went up to this other fellow and said to him, and started talking to him about her emotions and her process. And he says to her, wow, I think you're doing pretty good actually.
From what you're saying?
From what you're saying, it seems like you're doing pretty good. She says, oh, I'm so glad to hear you say that. AJ never says that to me. And then he realised in that moment that he'd been just suckered into an addiction. And then you know what she said? It's interesting that you said it to me. Don't you think that means that you might have an addiction to please? Yeah, she actually went one step further.
Out. Give me approval, give me approval. He gave it and she went, gee, you've really got an addiction.
How about that one? I thought that was pretty good. But again, the person feeling, because I have not said to them, you're doing pretty good. The truth is I don't feel she's doing pretty good. So I can't say she's doing pretty good when I don't feel she's doing pretty good. Does that make sense? And so the truth is, I've just treated her in the manner that I feel truthful with. So, but she then goes away feeling like, I want AJ to say to me, I'm doing really good, I'm doing really good. I want that from him so much. So her injured self, she needs to feel how much she wants that. Not go and get it from somebody else. She needs to feel how much she wants that. Does that make sense?
And if we know now, right? Addictions cover fear, which covers grief. The key, though, to dealing with addiction is first recognising the extent of the addiction. You can't just skip to the grief. It's not going to work. You have to want to open your eyes and see how much this permeates your entire life and then go, am I willing to give this up? Yeah, it's quite an intellectual process initially, but the more you engage it, the more emotional it becomes. You go, whoa, I get that from Laura, I get that from
Mary had a day,
from the corner store.
You had a day about a month ago or so, was it 2 months ago? So she comes walking up from the tent, because we've been sleeping apart for a bit, and she comes walking up to the tent, she goes, I'm just a crack at it. I've got addiction after addiction after addiction. I want you to meet this, and I want you to meet that, and I want you to meet...
Yeah, well, I could feel...
This is really bad, AJ. And I go, yeah. No, you don't understand. It's really bad.
I said, no, everything I do, everything, there's an addiction. And I'm stopping myself from going into the addictive place, but holy, it feels really, really bad. And I sometimes just want you to give me that emotion. Yeah. And
that's when you become honest with yourself about your addictions, you start seeing how much of it is in play. You know, it's very important to see that. So can you see the difference between this facade self, the self that you created, the injured self, the self that the parents damaged, and then this real self, the one that's got no injury that God created? What we're aiming for is this one, right? But to get to that one, we've got to feel this one. But we, in order to avoid feeling this one, created this one. And so what we find happening for many people is they keep creating emotions for them to experience without actually ever getting to a causal emotion. So, in other words, by me saying, I feel rejected in a situation where you're not being rejected, you have just created an imaginary emotion for you to feel in order to prevent you from feeling the real one. What's the point of that? Can you see? There's no point in that. Like, it doesn't accomplish anything.
But do you know why we do it? Why do you think we create this self?
The facade self.
The facade self.
So less pain.
We reckon it's less pain.
That's what we think.
What do we believe about this self? How's everyone else going to die? How's everyone else going to feel about this self?
This self, yeah, they're going to feel sorry for me. They're going to commiserate with me.
I'm the victim.
The truth is, I feel this self is going to be loved more than this self.
Gets more love.
That's my false belief. If I have an emotion where I'm a victim all the time, then I haven't done anything bad to anyone, and so people love me more.
Can you also see, though, that this one is our preferred image of ourselves?
Yes.
In other words, in this one, we sometimes have some very dark and evil emotions, actually. We actually have an emotions of demands, right the way down sometimes to murderous feelings.
Vengeful feelings.
Vengeance. ENC.
ENC. And also just emotions that our parents judge as bad.
Uh-huh.
So even when they come out into the light of the day, everyone else might not think they're that bad. But if our parents told us you should be ashamed of that emotion, we'll create something else.
So a lot of times we want to see this side of ourselves. So when somebody says to me, so the ladies that I mentioned in this example, the first lady, she wanted to feel rejected because she didn't want to feel that she'd just been unloving and demanding with me. In other words, she didn't want to feel her own unlovingness. So instead, she blamed me for mine, which I never had. I didn't have a feeling where I was rejecting her. I told her to go away and feel the feeling of wanting my approval, which was the actual feeling she needed to feel. So can you see in that moment, she preferred to feel rejected rather than feeling that she herself had been unloving. She preferred there than there. But if you prefer here, you will never grow, and every emotion you experience is totally pointless. Do you understand?
Process for hours.
You can process for hours these emotions, and nothing will change, ever.
And
Ever.
that should be the proof of your processing. Am I changing? Do I feel more loving to other people? Do I feel more connected to God? If the answers to those questions are not yes, okay, I need to look at my piles. Am I really emotionally processing?
Yep.
Like,
The truth is, this barrier here, this area here, is the area that we need to emotionally process. This area here is emotions of our own creation, which are pointless processing.
and can I say that the avoidance of two basic emotions create that self? Shame and fear. If I feel ashamed of what's inside of me or afraid of what's inside of me, I
I'll
will
always go
create
there.
the facade self.
So the lady in question I mentioned, she was ashamed of the fact that she had just tried to control me, and she had just tried to barter her way into my affection, right? And it didn't work, and she was ashamed of that. And instead of feeling that, she preferred to feel rejected by me instead.
And yet if she was willing to just acknowledge the truth, see the extent of the addiction and feel some shame, boom, she would have been straight into her causal emotion.
Does that make sense? Just wait for the mic if you can. Yep.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like me, but so I'm still not quite getting the chunk because I think it's me. But so if that lady had been, which I have, rejected by my mother and father and abandoned and stuff,
Yeah.
is that still not a causal?
Remember I said at the beginning of this that the emotion of rejection may still be a causal emotion. In other words, that you have
yes,
been rejected
yes.
by your mother or your father.
Which in my case-
However, you haven't been ever rejected by me.
No.
So if you're crying about how I've treated you in being rejected, I've never rejected you.
Even though in my injury I could see that you rejected me.
No, but can you see, you
Yeah,
need to
you're
be
right.
crying, for it to be a causal emotion, you need to be crying about your father or mother's rejection of you.
Yes.
Not
No.
mine,
Oh, okay, yeah.
because I never rejected
Okay,
you.
yeah.
Can I demonstrate? If we say, no board, if we say there's addiction and under addiction, there's fear. And under the fear, or yeah, sometimes there's anger in there as well, but there's the grief.
Yeah, the anger is usually in this
Yeah.
direction. So.
So if you think about it, when AJ said to the lady, I can't give you that approval, and she walked off crying about feeling rejected by AJ.
By me,
Yeah.
The truth was she was crying about her addiction not being met.
that's all.
However, she could have taken another route and gone, whoa, I feel ashamed. I've just demanded something. And that shows me the level of my addiction. Whoa, I must have a lot of fear. Oh, actually, I can feel that fear. I'm afraid that if I'm just myself around men and I don't
I won't
barter
get
with
anybody's
them,
approval.
they're never going to love me. And do you know what? That's taken me to a horrible place in my childhood. I feel like my dad rejected me. And there we go. I'm in the grief of rejection, but it's far more authentic.
Yeah.
So every
I'm in
demand,
this one.
every
You have-
demand is unloving and is an addiction. Even
Yes.
Subtle.
Yep.
Yes.
And I have to want to see the truth of that, but have compassion for myself in that place. If I don't have compassion and I judge it, so in her case, she didn't want to see the addiction. So she's crying about
AJ.
Yeah, AJ. If she had wanted to see the addiction and go, oh, okay, I must be in heavy addiction, and then judged it, she shuts down the process again.
But the irony is her father never rejected her
Right.
as well.
It
So she could
that
be
it-
crying
yeah.
about rejection from her father, but her father never rejected her. The issue she has is her father never gave her approval. And that's what the law of attraction event's about, the fact that she's not getting mine by bartering it. So she'd be more honest to feel the fact that Daddy never gave me approval than she would be to feel the feeling of rejection.
And that would be a causal.
Of course, yeah.
But
So
she would recognise the truth of the situation. She would feel her fear and then she would be in her grief.
yeah. But most of us want to feel these emotions because these emotions have a better outcome for ourselves. That's what we think. The reason why we think that is because we think, I can maintain my facade of myself while I hold on to these emotions. So while this lady is feeling rejected, she's holding on to the facade of herself. And the facade of herself is actually, she's a very demanding, unloving woman when it comes to men. She demands men's approval constantly.
That's her true self, you mean?
That's her true self. Oh, sorry, no, that's her injured self. She demands feelings of approval from men, and she's willing to barter not only like some seeds, but in the past she has bartered her whole body for it. Right? She's actually bartered herself sexually for man's approval. No other reason. So the reality is, if she went off and felt that emotion, she would have been far closer to what's really going on. That there is this demand coming at her desire to barter, and she would start looking at all of that.
And hey, like there must be a lot of pain for one of us to barter sexually our whole body in order to get this emotion. So if she has compassion for herself, she'll go, this is a big addiction, but whoa, there must be something underneath it.
Must be a big emotion underneath that.
Yeah.
But while she's feeling rejected by me, she is not getting anywhere near the demand, and therefore never getting to what's under the demand, and therefore never going to feel the causal emotion about it. So she can cry in her rejection for hours and say to everybody, yeah, last week AJ, rejected me as well.
But I had a good cry.
But I had a good cry about it, and at the end the whole thing's pointless, and it's also untrue, because I never did actually